All right, we're going to get back to the biology now, but we have that understanding of chemistry. But we're going to talk about a molecule that is going to be really important in a lot of reactions that we talk about, and just overall in general in moving energy around the cell. This molecule is called ATP. I've mentioned it several times now, but it is a nucleotide. It is adenosine triphosphate. So we have a sugar, we have the nucleobase, and then we have these three phosphates. That's the triphosphate part. So this is going to be critical in storing energy that gets released from catabolic processes. And then that stored energy can be used to power other reactions in anabolic reactions. So it's kind of the cell's energy currency. So the question is, like, where do we get the power for the endergonic reactions, the one that need energy to be added to them? You got to build things in your body. Where's that energy coming from? Well, ATP is the main source of providing that. So one of the biggest, most important reactions that we will talk about is taking glucose here and using some oxygen to break that down into CO2 and water. And in the process, we will harvest a large number of ATP to do other work in the cell. This ATP stores energy in its bonds. Okay, we have two bonds here that are really important. They're called, if you really want to know, phosphoanhydride bonds. Okay, not critical to know the name, but understanding that they store energy in there. And when you break these bonds, they release energy. So you can use these, break them, and use that energy to power other reactions. And then when you're harvesting energy, like from glucose, you put it into these bonds and store it there. So there's an energy cycle that's going on here. We have ATP here, and we have it full, right? Adenosine triphosphate. It's got three phosphates on it. If we have hydrolysis here, breaking of ATP, if we break off one of those phosphates, it releases energy. And we use that energy to power endergonic reactions, things that need energy to go in. Okay, now we're left with adenosine diphosphate, ADP, and what we call an inorganic phosphate. This phosphate's just chilling, hanging out here. Well, we need energy to be added to regenerate that ATP. That comes from exergonic reactions, like breaking down that glucose. We use that energy to stick that phosphate back onto ATP. And the cycle can continue here. So we're utilizing the energy stored in ATP to power endergonic reactions. We are harvesting energy from exergonic reactions to restore that ATP there. Now, you can also chop off both of the phosphates, and that gives extra energy. And then you get adenosine monophosphate, AMP. You may have heard of AMP if you take anatomy and physiology or something like that. There's a molecule called cyclic AMP that is an important signal in our body. It helps signal kind of what our energy state is. We'll talk a little bit more about cyclic AMP a little bit later in this course when we talk about gene regulation and things like this and regulating processes. So the key component here is to understand that these bonds that hold the phosphates on, they're storing energy for us. And there's two of them there. So ATP can be used to do work through what we call energy coupling. So this is an example of what we would call a sodium-potassium pump. This, obviously, the pump part is going to be moving the molecules against their concentration gradient. To do that, that's active transport. We need to spend energy. So here we have phosphate that is in the ATP being used to power this reaction. So we cut off that phosphate, and in the process, the potassium binds to it, and that releases sodium on the outside, potassium binds, and then it falls inside the cell as well. So the energy from here is being used to grab up sodium and push it outside and bring in potassium at the same time. Okay, let's take a look at this.
Adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is the molecule that powers all life on Earth. Energy from ATP is required for essential activity, including pumping ions across membranes and pulling apart the DNA helix. The ATP molecule is made of three main structures: an adenine nucleobase, a ribose sugar, and three phosphates. Energy is released when the bond holding the N-phosphate group is broken, converting ATP to ADP through a water-consuming hydrolysis reaction. To stay alive, your cells depend on enzyme pumps to maintain differences in ion concentration across membranes. The flow of calcium ions controls muscle contraction, nerve transmission, gene regulation, and cell death. Because of enzyme pumps, the concentration of calcium ions inside your living cells is 10,000 times lower than outside. The ATP hydrolysis reaction breaks the N-phosphate bond, releasing energy, driving atoms to rearrange inside the enzyme, transforming its shape. With each transformation, channels inside the enzyme open and close, sending ions in opposite directions, hydrogen in and calcium out of the cell. DNA helicase is another type of ATP-powered enzyme. This mechanism is so critical for life that 1% of your genetic code is for helicase enzymes. Helicase enzymes are motor proteins that move along the DNA double helix, mechanically separating strands powered by energy from ATP. The ring-shaped enzyme uses ATP hydrolysis to provide energy for the mechanical separation of strands of the DNA helix. With each step of the enzyme, two pairs of DNA bases are separated, requiring energy from two ATP molecules around the ring.
All right, I love those animations. They're super cool. So we see many different uses for ATP there, powering different reactions. We have things like pumping things across the membrane, separating DNA. All of these things require energy. Also, when we build DNA, we kind of utilize this same process. We're going to learn about how DNA gets replicated, but DNA uses nucleotides like adenosine triphosphate and other things. Each nucleotide starts out with 3 phosphates. We're going to use the energy stored in those phosphates to power the reaction to add new nucleotides to a growing DNA chain. We will learn all about this in the DNA chapter, but I just want you to remember that there's energy stored in the bonds. All right, let's finish up with a review question here. So, the removal of a phosphate from ATP to make ADP is an example of what type of reaction? Go ahead and pause the video. Think about this. Hopefully you chose catabolic reaction because we're breaking those bonds to cut off one of the phosphates, making ADP from ATP. Okay, so we talked a lot about adenosine triphosphate. It's a nucleotide with 3 phosphate groups on there. 2 of those are held on by those high-energy phosphoanhydride bonds. Okay, the bonds store energy. ATP is our main short-term energy currency for the cell. The hydrolysis of ATP breaks the phosphate off, releasing energy ATP regeneration does the reverse reaction, but you got to put energy in. Usually we're harvesting that energy from other catabolic reactions. And we can use ATP through a process called coupling. Energy coupling uses the released phosphate to phosphorylate something else, another molecule, and that causes a shape change that can power a process. So back here, when we have the pump changing state, we call that phosphorylation because the phosphate is added there, or we're harvesting its energy there. All right, perfect. That is it for 6.4.